It's time for the Your Personal Bank Show with Ferenc. In an era of chaos, confusion, and craziness, Ferenc is a voice for common sense. As a financial literacy educator, speaker, and entrepreneur, Ferenc cuts through the noise to help us understand how current events affect our money, economy, and our freedom. Now, here's Ferenc.
Welcome to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ferenc, and I have a very special guest this week. We have Sheila Wienburg with Truth in Accounting. And I was introduced to Truth in Accounting because I had actually referenced one of their studies or articles that they had put out. They reached out to me. I really liked what they do as an organization, so I invited them to the show. So first of all, Sheila, welcome to the Your Personal Bank Show.
Oh, thank you for having me, and thank you for your interest in this important topic.
You're welcome, very much so. So Sheila, first question I guess I should ask is, what is Truth in Accounting?
Oh, Truth in Accounting is a non-partisan, non-profit organization, or some people think of us as a fiscal watchdog. We differentiate ourselves in that we really do not care about politics, believe it or not, even though we deal with the government numbers. We just want the numbers done correctly. So at our core, we really believe that our representative forms are being a form of government is being harmed because citizens do not have the financial information they need to make knowledgeable decisions on, tax or spending policy, or even who to vote for. So what we do is we've found that the governments, believe it or not, might not be truthful about their numbers. And so we go ahead and recast those, bringing more transparency and accountability to the governments.
Truth in Accounting, I understand, is made up of a group of CPAs and those types of folks. And what's your role with Truth in Accounting?
I'm the founder and CEO. I am a CPA. We have business people, academic people on our board and involved in our organization.
If somebody was wanting to get more information on what you guys put out, where would they go to find that out?
Well, thanks for asking. We have two websites, truthinaccounting.org or data-z.org. Data-z is where we deposit all of the data that we collect. We have, in addition, today, I think we'll focus on the federal government, but we do also have even more information on state and local governments, including the federal government, on our data-z.org website.
So if somebody wanted to nerd out on the numbers, they should go there.
Oh, yeah. We have a great charting feature there. It allows you to compare your state to other states or cities using like 700 different data points. So if you want to know how good your city's doing, or history of your unfunded pensions or cities numbers, and then we don't just have financial information. We have like if you're looking for a place to move to, what's the median household income? We do find a funny data point is that we find that the more attorneys you have in a state, the more worse their financial condition seems to be. I hope you're not an attorney or none of your listeners.
I'm sure some are, but it's interesting that I wonder if that correlates in any way. It's interesting. So Sheila, you and I were talking in the break before we started so how do your numbers differ for what we typically see with, like the Congressional Budget Office numbers, that type of thing? What's the difference?
Well, the federal government has just reached a $33 trillion deficit. That's what they report. That's what they claim. But to give you some sense of what they're not reporting, I would ask you some questions that will highlight what they're not recording. So, friends, would you go ahead and do you believe that our veterans are owed the benefits that they have been promised?
Oh, of course, probably more than almost anyone else.
Yeah, and then do you believe that our seniors, they have been promised benefits in the form of Social Security and Medicare? Are they owed those benefits?
That's the laws on the books, right?
Yeah, and those numbers, what us accountants call liabilities, those bills are not included in the $33 trillion. So once you add those bills, you get to an unfortunate number. Not that the $33 billion isn't big enough.
Or trillion, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah, trillion. Once you add those promises, you get up to almost $160 trillion. And what we're doing is we're recasting the numbers and we're including not numbers that we make up. These are numbers we get from the Social Security and Medicare and the federal government financial report. We're adding the Social Security and Medicare and veterans benefit liabilities into the numbers because we believe that, like you and like most American, that these people are owed these benefits because they have been promised them. So once you add those to the $33 trillion, you get up to almost $169 trillion. 60 trillion.
Yeah, Sheila, the problem I think most people have, and I find it, I even deal with this, us non-accountant types, when you throw out numbers like 33 trillion or 160 trillion or whatever, it's just unfathomable. You just can't relate to it. These numbers are beyond. Do you guys do anything to kind of break it down some way so it be a measurable, tangible, like how much is that per person or household or that type of thing?
We break it down by the number of taxpayers. So if you go to our website, you'll see our spinning debt clocks, which unfortunately spin faster than we would like them to do. And then next to that is the people who have filed a federal income tax return and don't have like where they're not paying any taxes. So anybody who files a return owes Social Security, Medicare, income tax. We consider them a taxpayer. And we divide the $160 trillion by those number of taxpayers and come up with a mere, again, unfortunately, even dividing it by number of taxpayers, you get almost to $1 million. It's $952 trillion. I mean, $952,000 per taxpayer. And another way to think about it is that number represents benefits that the government has promised people, and Congress and the president have not figured out where they're going to pay those, how much they're going to pay those benefits. So a lot of people have been promised benefits, but the government does not set aside money to pay for those benefits.
So the bottom line is, like typical politicians promise a whole lot of things, and they promise nearly, like you said, $1 million in benefits per taxpayer approximately. And they have no way at this point of really funding that.
And what it does is it makes people are sort of like, the numbers are big, it's all theoretical, but we really believe it makes it so, people feel kind of disconnected from the government. They feel disillusioned from the government. They're cynical to the government. And we all believe that it stems in the lack of accountability. And the way you hold the elected officials accountable is you make them tax for what they're spending. There was a great quote by a former Treasury official named Ferenc, and he said a politician shouldn't have the pleasure of spending, i.e. they're going to get a vote, without the pain of taxing, i.e. they're going to lose a vote. And so if you think about over the years, if the elected officials had to tax for all the benefits that they have given or promised, then we might not have reelected them. Or if as politicians are going around and saying, hey, I'm going to give you this goodie, I'm going to give you that goodie. If they also said, well, yeah, I'm going to give you that, but just so you know, I have to tax you to give you that. I have to charge even more taxes. And I think I haven't calculated the numbers recently, but I think the tax rate for everybody would have to be over 50% to cover just all of the benefits and promises that the government has made.
Sheila, you're absolutely right on that. And I do think that a lot of taxpayers, as you define it, people are actually having to pay into the system, are understanding this, or if they haven't, they're definitely starting to. I think the other bigger problem might be, and I don't know if there's a solution to this, but approximately half of the people don't pay taxes into the system they receive.
Yeah, and everybody should have some skin in the game. And so again, if you think back to the situation where, just say even a low income person, if they had to pay just a small percentage of their income, let's say 5%, 2%, but then again, when the government went ahead and politicians went ahead and said, well, we're going to go to Ukraine and we're going to fight this war. Well, okay, we're going to have to raise your 2%, to 2.1%. Or now we're going to offer this new benefit. Well, now we have to raise that 2% to 2.5%. If there was some correlation, then we could hold them accountable for their spending. But the way it is now, they're just free to spend and print and borrow as much as they want to. And I'm sure in your road trip, you've found numerous Americans who are very cynical about the government. And again, this is why we're feeling that the fabric of our governments our representative form of government is being fractured. Is one of them, being accountants, we think it starts with the numbers.
You're probably on target on a lot of that, and Sheila, you're absolutely right. In fact, what I run into when I talk to a lot of people is they've got their head in the sand because they're so frustrated. They feel like there's nothing they can do. My response is, and that's what I love what you guys are doing, is Thomas Jefferson said it, I think, best, is the only way to maintain a democracy is through an educated electorate. And so I would say to them, look, putting your head in the sand is actually contributing to the problem. You have to get educated before we can figure out solutions. So that's what I love what you guys do.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you mentioned that. Is just our purpose, is to educate the citizens about what's really going on. And we don't have any tax spending policies. I tell people, it's just like, if people knew how much the government was in debt, how much it was going to cost to do things, if they were truly financially educated about their government and its spending and its taxes, then our mission would be done. It would be up to others to say, oh, well, we want to spend more, or we want to have tax cuts, or we don't care about any of that. We just want the numbers done correctly.
Well, what you were describing before, probably I was going to ask that, but the solution is probably a balanced budget of constitutional amendment or something like that.
That is, again, we wouldn't propose that, but that is probably the strongest way to. It could be the strongest way to hold them accountable. The problem you have is 49 of the 50 states have a balanced budget amendment. We're just about ready to issue our 14th annual financial state of the states. And it has, despite these balanced budget requirements, the states have accumulated almost $1 trillion of debt. So the politician, you have to be very very careful on how you word the balanced budget and a balanced budget amendment, and don't, because what they've figured out is, well, okay, I have to balance right now, but I can still get votes by promising people in the future benefits.
Okay, so we're going to get, Sheila, we're going to get into that a little bit in the next segment. I want to talk about, because I think that's interesting. Like you said, 49 of the 50 states have a balanced budget amendment, yet most of them are taking on debt. So we're going to discuss that in the next segment, why that is the case and what needs to be done. So I'm going to encourage folks to stay tuned to the show. We've got Sheila with us the entire show. I think you're going to find it very educational. And if you want to contact me, you can always reach out to me at yourpersonalbank.com. Stay tuned in the next segment. Don't miss it.
Stay tuned for more common sense from Ferenc. For more information, contact Ferenc at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ferenc Toth. Want more information? Contact Ferenc at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Now back to the show with Ferenc Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ferenc, and we have a very special guest today. We have Sheila Wienburg with Truth in Accounting. She is the founder and CEO. And Truth in Accounting, if you missed in the first segment, I'm going to really encourage you to go to yourpersonalbank.com. You can listen to this or any of the previously recorded shows, actually. But Sheila has shared some very interesting information from the federal debt and what the government is doing, that type of thing. But Sheila, welcome. First of all, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sheila, for joining us. But you had mentioned at the end of the last segment, you're coming out with your, I think you said 14th annual State of the States accounting report or whatever what's going you and you also, I thought this was very interesting. You mentioned how 49 of the 50 states of the union have balanced budget provisions in their constitutions, yet it sounds like most, if not all, are taking on debt. What's going on with the states?
Yeah, the states, again, a lot of people point to when they talk about a constitutional amendment for the federal government to balance its budget. I point out that, 49 of the 50 states have balanced budget amendments, but 29 states, even though they have balanced budget amendments, have acquired debt to the tune of almost $1 trillion. And the way they do it is their balanced budget amendments, in essence, their requirements are not worded well. So for Illinois, being my home state, is the worst worded. All it does is say that, their funds available have to equal their expenditures. And this just leaves them just loopholes to more than almost $200 billion through those loopholes. I think the easiest way to explain how they do it is to ask you some personal questions,
Okay.
and then we'll transfer that over to the states, which is, would you consider your budget balanced if you had to borrow money to balance your budget?
Well, of course not.
And would you consider your budget balanced if you went ahead and had people working around your house and it got close to the holidays and you realize, well, if I pay these people in full, then I'm not going to be able to buy presents for my friends and keep my friendships with them. So I'll just tell them I'll pay them. My kids will pay you later with some interest. Would you consider that budget balance?
No, that's an unfunded liability.
Just you get a bill, but you just choose not to write a check for it until the next pay period, until the next your next budget year. Would you consider your budget balanced?
Of course not, because you have that bill due still.
Right. So then let's flip it to a state. Would you consider a state's budget balanced if it borrowed money to balance that budget?
If they didn't include the interest owed, no.
They go ahead. So, for example, the state of Illinois, the governor here is proudly claiming that his whole term he has balanced the budget. The state was in such poor financial shape when the COVID crisis hit, they couldn't go to the bond market like most governments did. The Federal Reserve of the United States actually had to open up a special borrowing facility to lend Illinois money. And they lent them $3.5 billion because the balanced budget, remember the requirement, the wording said that their funds available had to equal their expenditures. Okay. So now, wouldn't you consider borrowed money funds available? It is. I have it, so
I guess it's in your account, right?
Yeah, so Illinois can quote. The governor can come out and say, I balanced the budget, but he borrowed money. If they get close to the end of the year and they realize that the budget, they've overspent, then they just push bills off into the future. So they might get a printing bill and then it's like, oh, well, we can't pay that and balance our budget. So we'll just pay that in the future. And this is so bad in Illinois that they have a law that they have to pay 1.5% interest per month on all of these unpaid bills to vendors. And this gets up to, I think it's been as high as $12 billion of these bills that they keep on pushing off into the future. But again, going back to that requirement, it just said funds available equal my expenditures. So it's only the checks I've written. It's not my bills that I have incurred. It's the checks that I've written. And then all of the states all of the states have been doing this, which is I'd say that this is the root of their pension problems. Because again, they can promise employees benefits now. They don't have to write the check for it now. And they push that on to future taxpayers.
Right. They're long gone before that liability is actually due.
That's right. And so they get the vote. They get the pleasure of promising without having to tax. And so again, this whole accountability has been, the reason they have balanced budget requirements is for this accountability that the politicians shouldn't be able to spend without taxing. And because they use these budgeting accounting shenanigans, they're able to say, yes, we balance the budget while they're going into debt at the same time.
Is there a state example of a state that's doing it right, or maybe has a balanced budget that operates like it should?
I think Utah is the closest states. We do have states that have not gone into debt. I think we're up to 22 states that haven't gone into. I can't remember the numbers are honestly.
Sure.
I've been reviewing them for months. They're
That's fine.
just dancing in my head right now. But we do have some states: Alaska, Utah, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming. Utah does the best. We actually presented them with a Truth in Accounting Award. They actually do plan for even in the future. They truly balance their budget now and plan in the future how they're going to balance. I know it's a novel idea for politicians.
Wow, planning.
And I was fortunate to present that to their budget director. And I said, you can answer a question that people give me all the time, which is, why are you guys doing it right and other states are doing it wrong? And she said, well, we have something really weird that we do here. We only promise the services and benefits that we can afford. That was where other states.
Is it more? I think it's more. I don't know if it's more about the law, the way it's written, or it's more about the intention of the people and the voters being educated, meeting their expectations. You think it's more that?
I think it's those two combined,
right.
Plus just a philosophy. I was also able to speak to a state senator in Utah, and he said as a state, we just have a philosophy, and the people in the state just are against debt. They
right.
personally try to stay away from debt. It would be interesting to see what their credit card debt is compared to other states. I don't know if I have that data point on our Data Z website, but that would be an interesting one to have. I think we might have per capita. So it's just a philosophy of not doing debt. But again, the wording of these balanced budget requirements, to make it harder for them to, skirt the wording, and not make it easy to have loopholes, and get some better work. What we propose is full accrual calculations and techniques, fact-based budgeting, which is you have to include only the revenue that you earn. You can't borrow money. The other trick they do is they'll move money from one pocket to another pocket, and that mysteriously helps them balance the budget. And you have to include all the bills you paid, and you can't push cost in the future. So if people, we promote this fact-based budgeting to, it's closer to what corporations do when they do their financial reports and their budgeting.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, Sheila. Is I've been an entrepreneur for almost 30 years now, and of course I have to file a business return every year, and of course I was going to ask you, what's the difference between how they're accounting and how a typical business has to account? Sounds like night and day difference to me.
Yeah, and I find it very interesting that the IRS does not allow, hopefully you're in this range with your business, a business that makes more than, I think it's up to, let's say 30, I think it's $26 million per year. If their revenue is that way, they have to do what us accountants boringly call accrual accounting. You have to include all of your expenses. But if you don't make that, then you can do what they call cash basis. So it's only money coming in and money going out. Well, cities and states make a lot more than $25 million a year, yet they're still doing this in what some people think is antiquated old accounting to circumvent their balanced budget requirements.
It's probably mostly intentional, obviously, so they can, like you said, make the promises without the pain. Yeah, and
but again, if you had requirements, and again, if you had an educated electorate, what they do in New Zealand, it's very interesting, is they do their books correctly. Their budgeting is closer to doing it well. But what they do is the accounting, like the CBO or the Office of Management and Budget, every quarter they come out and say, well, over the last 3 months, the legislature has increased or decreased our what they call fiscal deficit by X amount of money. And if they're close to an election, the people are sort of like, well, hold it, they just increased our deficit by so much money. Maybe we don't want them back in office, or
Right.
some people we don't care, but at least they have that information.
Right, because there's really no accurate, like you said, it doesn't seem to me that the federal government or the states, for the most part, there really isn't any accurate accounting information being put out there.
The state and federal governments do put out financial statements. Obviously, they're after the fact. For example, California has not put out their June 2022 financial statement. It's like, and so
I'll get
the
around to
financial
it.
statements do have pretty accurate numbers. I could go into the details on why they're not accurate, but I'm sure my accounting talk has already bored people, so I won't. You can go to our website and find out. So the financial statements are pretty accurate. And what I say is, okay, even if you're not going to fix your process, one, make sure that your financial statement is out before your budget process. You should know the prior year, or at least I think they're looking 1 year back. So at least know what happened 2 years ago before you start with a future budget. And then two, go ahead and do what us accountants call a pro forma. If this budget passes, what's going to happen to your balance sheet? Do you project that our income statement will show a gain or a loss? And then that way, even that way, in the future, they could go ahead and compare that budget to what really happened.
There you go.
Did it do what we really thought it did?
Well, thank you, Sheila. You're absolutely right. I'm going to encourage you to stay tuned in the next segment, because I'm going to ask Sheila a question about that I learned about an award that government agencies receive if they pay enough money to this organization. So stay tuned. I think you're going to find it very enlightening. Don't miss it.
Stay tuned for more common sense from Ferenc. For more information, contact Ferenc at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ferenc Toth. Want more information? Contact Ferenc at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Now back to the show with Ferenc Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. Today we have a very special guest, Sheila Wienburg with Truth in Accounting. Sheila has been sharing with us some very enlightening information in terms of how governments, both federal and state and local, how they really truly do their accounting, how their numbers are actually accounted for, or lack thereof, I should say, really. It's been very eye-opening and educational. So Sheila, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
That's awesome. So, of course, if you did miss the first segments, go to yourpersonalbank.com. You can listen to this or any of the previously recorded shows. But in the last segment, Sheila was talking a lot about the state of the states in terms of accounting. I also learned in getting connected with your organization, Sheila, about an award. I understand states and local governments get an accounting award they get if they pay enough money into this system. So tell us about that.
There is an organization called the Government Financial Officers Association. So by the name, it's a group of government financial officers, and they offer the certificate in excellence for their financial reports. So they do have volunteers look through the financial reports and see if they meet certain requirements, and then they give an award. But they have to. There is a fee for this search. Again, volunteers are looking at it, so I don't know why they need to charge a fee. But then they get an award. I can't remember the payment schedule. it's between, I would say, like $1,000 and $15,000, that maybe even $25,000 that a large government has to pay to get this award. Now, one of the big things, which we also believe is very critical, is timeliness. So they have a timeliness criteria, which is the governments have to issue their financial report within 60 days. Within 6 months of their fiscal year end. Keep in mind, corporations are issuing their reports about 45 days after their fiscal year end. This is giving them a break. Give them 180 days to issue their financial report. But we did find one year we did a study of like, well, how many people are getting this award but not meeting that requirement? And we did find numerous states that were like my home state of Illinois. I think they've gotten the award every year, and they are usually, more than 300 days. It almost sometimes takes them more than a year statement, but then they still get the award, even though that's a criteria for the award. So we're kind of baffled.
Well, they pay the money in, so it's like those trophies you get, those business awards. We all have seen them, and there's the scams, we call them. But you're the best of this or that if you pay this organization an outfit, and unfortunately, it's very predominant out there.
Yeah.
So, all right, Sheila, we've been talking a lot about government debt in particular, accounting standards and all that, but particularly government debt. I want to play devil's advocate for a minute. Okay, the government has a lot of debt and all that. They obviously are never going to pay it all back. So what? What do I care as an individual citizen?
Well, one, as we've been talking about, is accountability. And again, if they can, and I think that more conservatives or people who don't like taxes, I think they should be concerned, because what happens is the government expands beyond what people are willing to pay for, and they offer services and benefits, and it's very hard. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's very hard to contract government. When have you seen a program that started and then just like a few years later, it's like, even the COVID money, which was theoretically for, COVID relief and to help people during COVID, people now are like, well, no. You've offered me this benefit, like say medical benefit or now what? No, you can't take it away. So what they do is they just keep on borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. And then in the States, for example, Illinois, they, kept on expanding their pension benefits, but the benefits are guaranteed by their constitution. So they theoretically can't take those away. So if you can't stop spending and you can't stop including the pensions and retiree healthcare benefits, then what's the third option? Which is you have to raise taxes after you can't borrow anymore. You have to you borrow, and then when you can't, and then eventually you're going to have to pay that money back. Another way to look at debt is at deferred taxes. At the state level, we do a per taxpayer burden, and this is the amount that future taxpayers are going to be burdened with. So in Illinois, a couple of years ago, that number was over 50. I think they're down to 43. Let's say it's $40,000. So this is taxpayers are going to have to pay $40,000 in taxes in the future, and they're not going to receive any government services or benefits for those. Those have already been, that money was spent years ago. So one, it's a deferred tax. Two, it makes you can't hold them accountable because they're spending more than they're taxing. And would people have voted for these people incumbents if they would have had to tax them to balance their budget or to fund the programs that they have promised or have spent for?
I run into a lot of people, and you're absolutely right, Sheila, but I do run into a lot of people that are like, well, whatever. And especially, I find this with a lot of older Americans, to be fair. Well, I don't care. It's not going to affect me. And what I share with a lot of them is one, this could end up happening a lot quicker than you think. I talk about potential, like you said, if they can't borrow, then they're going to have to tax more. Austerity measures. We saw that in Greece, for example. It's going to be forced upon them at some point. And this could happen a lot sooner than you want. And, do you care about your kids and grandkids? That's the other thing I bring up.
Right. And I'm pulling up from our data-c website, our financial state of the union. at how much was borrowed in the last, which was a financial state of the union of 2021.
Well, actually, while you're looking at that, two things that came up is the Heritage Foundation last week or so came out with a big study saying that the federal government added 7.5 trillion in debt over the 2 COVID years. Also, I've seen very recently our deficit is projected to be $2 trillion for this year, 2023.
One of the reasons I started Truth in Accounting was because it was during the years that the budget was theoretically balanced and they had surpluses as far as the eye could see. And I always thought, well, back then, which was, more than 20 years ago, was like, well, if people understood that the deficit was more than $1 trillion, which back then, if you calculated the numbers right, they were doing a deficit of $1 trillion. If people understood that, then they would be concerned. But I'm sort of like, well, they don't seem to be concerned. It's trillion.
Sheila, I don't think it's so much they're not concerned. I think it's a combination of probably number one, lack of education or understanding, because they're not listening to the right sources, media sources. They're not telling them the truth. CBOE and all the Congressional Budget Office, all these things are not really telling the truth, or they're putting their head in the sand. They're just overwhelmed.
In 2021, looking at the numbers, the true deficit that was reported on their audited financial statements was $3 trillion. Okay. If you include the expansion or the increases in Social Security and Medicare, you're at $10 trillion. But again, it's high numbers. So let's take a few zeros off. The expenses were $7 trillion. They had to borrow $3 trillion.
Well, to me, a good analogy would be in that case, you let's see, you made 70,000 a year, but you had to borrow 30,000 because your expenses were 100. Am I right? Basically,
we're looking at a little wrong, but I will add. Yeah, let's say you're making $40,000 a year.
All right.
Your expenses are $70,000 a year.
Okay.
You're $30,000 a year short every year.
Right. You might give away with that for a year, 2 maybe. But then your debt ability is going to run out.
Yeah. And then when your borrowing ability runs out,
right?
Then you're spending 70. You would have to cut by $30,000 as soon as the borrowing facility ran out.
Right.
So, the federal government would almost have to. Okay, what are we going to cut? Of the federal government, we'd have to cut. I'm not good at math. I'm just an accountant. No, just kidding. I'm not good at math in my head. I'm really good at spreadsheets. They would have to cut, let's say it's a third. I think it's more than a third, almost half of their budget.
Right.
If they couldn't borrow. And so what of that third, or they would have to raise taxes by more, they're only bringing in $4 trillion. They'd have to bring in $7 trillion. They'd have to massively increase their taxes.
Right.
And then we do go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, Sheila, the analogy I give, I like that one. It's like you said, you make 40,000 a year. That's a number people can relate to, and you're spending 70,000 a year, and that's what our government did in 2021, like you said. And a lot of people say, well, what do I care? Especially older Americans. I point out, well, Social Security trustees report and Medicare trustees are telling us in a few years are going to run out of their surplus, and your benefits are going to get cut by approximately, I've heard the number they say, about 25%. So whatever your Social Security check is, if nothing changes, you're going to get about 75% of what you were getting, and that's not that far down the road. I think that's only we're looking at 6 or 7 years down the road, I believe, at this point. And if they keep spending like they're spending, that's probably going to be it's probably going to be faster, right?
Right. There is something I posted in 2015. I'd run across these 2 debt doomsday scenarios. One of them is hyperinflation. Part of this hyperinflation is death by hyperinflation is that the federal government, they can't sell bonds fast enough. They can't find buyers because they're spending so much money. So then the Federal Reserve buys the money and buys the bonds. Well, when they buy the bonds, they have to produce dollars. They have to turn the printing press on, and inflation happens. How many people are experiencing inflation right now?
Right, that is already happening.
Their gasoline.
Actually, Sheila, I'm going to cut you off right here because I want to come back in the last segment and give you a little bit of time. You've brought this up. you've actually come up with, like you said, two different potential doomsday scenarios if things don't change. So, folks, I'm going to really encourage you to stay tuned in the last segment because I think Sheila's on to something here. She certainly has the background and experience and knowledge, no question, with truth in accounting. Stay tuned in the next segment because Sheila's going to share with us what she believes could potentially be one of the two doomsday scenarios in this debt cycle that's going to happen to us if things don't change and get better. Again, if you want to contact me, yourpersonalbank.com. Definitely stay tuned in the next segment. Do not miss it.
Stay tuned for more common sense from Ferenc. For more information, contact Ferenc at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ferenc Toth. Want more information? Contact Ferenc at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Now back to the show with Ferenc Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. This has been an outstanding show. Excellent guest with Sheila Wienburg of Truth in Accounting. Sheila, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having it. It has been a delightful conversation. Sorry if some of it is doomsday discussion.
Well,
people have to know the facts.
I tell people this all the time, and we're going to have Sheila share two of her doomsday projections, what she anticipates going to happen if this debt, spending, all this kind of government stuff doesn't change. But before we get into that, and I don't know about you, but I find a lot of people that we're just sick and tired of the government treating us like little kids. We're adults. Give us the facts, good news, bad news, whatever. At least if we're dealing with the facts, then we can make intelligent decisions. If you're just playing, treating us like little kids, it's obnoxious and annoying, in my opinion. But you mentioned the state of the states, and we forgot to bring this up. You have an event. You have an event coming up. Please tell us about it if somebody wants to get involved.
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, we're going to issue our 14th annual financial state of the states, which we had to start producing. Realized that the state and local governments were not putting their pension and retiree debt on their books. So we started doing this financial state of the states. I was able to go to our truthinaccounting.org website and go to our events page and go to upcoming events. And it's going to be on October 11th when we issue the financial state of the states. It's going to be in Denver at the Independence Institute. And we are going to have John Caldera, the president of the Independence Institute, John Dugall, he is the Utah State Auditor. We talked about how Utah is doing things right. So he will enlighten us on ways, hopefully, that other states can do their books correctly. So it is a lunchtime event, so people can go on there and just sign up. The doors open at 11 and sign up for the event, and I will be.
So again, that's October 11th, you said, in Denver?
Yes, in Denver.
And go to truthinaccounting.org to the event page for more information if you want to get involved. Great. One of my last questions, Sheila, is you've been mentioning these two doomsday projections. If spending and debt and all that continue like we've been seeing, what do you anticipate happening going forward?
Well, this came from some authors. Spell the name. It's Figgie, and he has these two doomsday scenarios that he's projecting. The first one is death by hyperinflation. And the plot here of this first nightmare is currently going on. And unfortunately, it's speeding up. It's taking shape quickly, which is our rising deficits and trade deficits keep on ballooning. We run a foreign debt. We rely heavily on, China and Japan. They own, foreign governments own a large part of our debt to fund these deficits. And one thing that it's impacting is if you owe somebody money, you're indebted to them and you have to keep them happy. So if we're indebted to, say, China, okay, and I mention this because some Defense Department officials have mentioned this. If we're indebted to China, and let's say, God forbid, they do invade Taiwan, then we have to call China to borrow money to invade them. Or at least they would go, well, hold it. We're going to stop borrowing your treasury bonds. And keep in mind, again, we pointed out that, a large percent, more than a third, almost a half of our budget is borrowed. Well, China stops borrowing our money. That might make other people, for other governments, afraid to borrow their money, and then we wouldn't have money to pay.
If China stopped
benefits.
buying the U.S. bonds, I would predict economic chaos unlike we've seen since the Great Depression.
Yeah, because we couldn't. And another thing is we find that we have to use our military might instead of our our financial might to encourage people to to not do invade other countries. And in
Right.
this case, we might have to use military. That's a scary scenario, and it's already happening. And if the people just stop. Unfortunately, the bonds are short term, so we do keep on having to roll them over. And some great smart person decided to to make them short term instead of long term. So we have to keep on rolling them over. If they don't, then we might have to pay higher interest. Another thing is that the credit rating agencies have finally downgraded us, which causes us to pay more interest.
The statement you made earlier was very profound when you said the debtor, if you owe somebody, you've got to keep the debtor happy. You're the borrower. And a lot of people, the current administration, of course, obviously very friendly towards China. I mean, think of the Chinese spy balloon, letting it fly over. You don't want to upset China. And a lot of people have struggled to understand why we're so soft on China, or the current administration is. That probably speaks to a lot of it. Like you said, don't want to upset them too much, want them to keep buying our bonds, because if they don't, we have economic devastation.
Yes. And that could be a reason that, and I found it interesting.
Just makes logical sense. That's all I'm saying.
I found it interesting when Obama ran, he spoke during his campaign of the human rights violations in China. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that was horrible.
Right.
Once he was elected, who was the first cabinet member he sent to China? The Secretary of Treasury. And I never heard anything after he was elected about Chinese human rights violations.
Right. Well, even the Bible says the debtor is the slave to the lender, right?
Yeah.
I call it basic financial literacy that lacks sorely, sadly.
Yeah. And we're not. And and the other thing is, okay, you can say, truth in accounting and they're alarmists, but generals in the Defense Department have brought this up. They think that our national debt is the number one security risk that we have.
It's a national security issue. I've heard that from the Pentagon and other generals, no question.
Yeah.
So hyperinflation is one doomsday scenario, and we're certainly seeing the beginnings of that, at least with higher inflation. And I've heard also there's been some balking in the bond markets of, like you said, the credit rating went down, means they pay more interest, but there's been some balking and some having more and more difficulty selling the bonds in the bond market. So I think we're in the beginnings of that.
This really scares me, is that people are talking about the U.S. dollar not being the world currency. That would be a disaster. So the two doomsday scenarios are, hyperinflation that we talked about at the previous section, and then this session, where we're talking about this where they're not going to be able to borrow, is death by panic, which again they're having to sell these bonds. People aren't buying them, so they have to increase the interest rates. Again, I think we're spending trillions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars a year on interest every year. I mentioned the charting feature on our website. I think that is a data point on our federal website, is how much interest we're paying every year.
I saw recently it's gone up 30%. We're paying 30% more in interest than we were a year ago, because just the higher interest rates.
And the interest rate, the last time I've been focused, honestly, in the last 6 months, let's see, interest paid generally. I'm just going to pull up the chart right now. You can pull up the chart and you can select the number of years. And in 2022, we spent $980 billion.
Just shy of $1 trillion then.
Right. And remember we said our expenses were 7. So 1/7 of our budget was spent just on interest. And that was in 2022, before we started getting these higher interest rates.
So correct me if I'm wrong, Sheila, so that I can understand this and others. We're making $40,000 a year in income. we're spending 70,000 a year in expenses, and 10 grand of that is interest on our debt.
Yes.
Am I right?
Yes, and
Roughly.
keep in mind that people's credit card, just like people's credit card interest rate has gone up. So you're not going to spend 10, you're going to spend even more.
Right.
The federal government's interest charges
Went up.
went up also, and they're going to spend.
Well, if we use the analogy, last year they spent roughly 7,000 in a year in interest, and now they're spending 10 because their costs went up 30%, roughly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So if your interest expenses go up 30% a year, you've got a financial mess on your hands.
Yeah.
To summarize everything we've talked about, Sheila, and again, I really appreciate you joining us today. It's been very enlightening. A balanced budget for the federal government amendment, something like that, a constitutional amendment, would be helpful, but it's not the panacea of everything, like you've shared earlier. Really, the ultimate solution is changing hearts and minds, educating the people, having the right expectation, having educated voters, like Jefferson stated, like you said, how Utah is operating, having that expectation of both the people in charge and the people voting for them. Am I right?
Yeah, and and our mission, just you hit our mission exactly. Our whole mission statement is to educate and empower citizens with understandable, reliable, transparent government financial information. That's our whole mission.
So we got an election coming up next year, and if you're looking at candidates, you should be looking at people who are expressing financial responsibility issues.
Yeah, and if they're saying like, oh, well, I'm going to give you this, I'm going to give you that, we're going to do this program. Pull up. You can go to our data website, website. You can pull up the financial state of the union, and just bring that to the event and say, hey, well, we're more than $100 trillion in debt. What are you going to do about that? Or you can go to our data-z website and pull up your state or city's financial state of the state
city.
and
Right.
take that to the event and say, what are you doing about this?
I
would
like
really
it.
encourage them to do that.
Yeah. So if we ask the tough questions that the media refuses to do, the citizenry does, and we get educated and we vote accordingly, we can start to make a difference.
Yeah.
So thank you, Sheila, for joining us. If you want more information with Truth in Accounting, it's truthinaccounting.org. Go to their website. Thank you for joining us, Sheila. It was very enlightening, very educational.
Well, thanks for having me. If anybody have any questions, they can email info@truthinaccounting.org.
And if you want to contact me to how to manage this economic chaos that we may be dealing with soon, contact me at yourpersonalbank.com. Stay tuned to next week's show. We're going to have one of our favorite guests, John Burley, real estate expert. If you know the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki, he's in that book. You're not going to want to miss that. And again, as long as it's still on our money, I like to always share this. In God, we trust.
Listen Tuesdays at noon and Saturdays at 1 to the Your Personal Bank Show for more information. Contact Ferenc at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. This show is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information. The presenter and guests of this program do not engage in legal, accounting, or tax advice. Professional advice regarding your situation should be sought if required. Some products discussed may have limitations and not be available in all states. Excessive unpaid loans may affect performance. Distributions may become taxable if not managed properly. Replacements may not be suitable for everyone. There may be charges when replacing coverage. Dividend rates and bank line of credit rates may change. For current rates, contact Ferenc at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. Again, that's 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com.